show that this one is pending. Yes, it shows this is pending.
Oh, we got it. Okay. Here he comes.
You just said, get here.
Must have heard me. Heard my call.
Do my best.
Hello.
Hi. Look, you're still waiting for me.
Dan, could we have
I'm waiting for 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 seconds.
could we have a moment of remembrance for 9/11 today?
Appropriate.
Thank you.
All right, I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission for September 11th, 2018. This meeting is being both audio and video recorded. Before we start, my fellow commissioner, Mrs. Topham, has expressed a wish for we observe a moment of silence in remembrance of 9/11. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Are there any comments on the agenda? Hearing none, it's approved. We have minutes for the August 14th meeting. Are there any additions or corrections? Is there a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Biscaron. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Planzer. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried unanimously. May I have a motion, please, to ratify the warrant of August 22nd, 2018, and approve the warrant of September 12th, 2018?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously. Is there public comment at this time on any matter that's not on the agenda? Hearing none, we'll go to pending leases and contracts. Mr. Rafter?
The first item on the agenda is not ready for movement. That's the electric company. So we have two contracts. The first is with Franklin Paint for $18,570, and that's purchase of a paint striper. That's out of the capital fund. We also have a contract with Hortonville Consulting for ARF training for $25,400.
I thought the paint striper was really reasonable in today's world. I don't know how big or small, what it's like, but
It's not that big, but it'll do a lot of, it'll cut the time in half. obviously.
exactly. Yeah.
It's paint that's expensive.
Yeah, exactly, the beads.
Paint and the labor. Any further questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve the contract with Franklin Paint and the contract with Hortonville Consulting?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any further comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously. General fund repayment, any movement on that?
No movement on that from the town, and on the crew quarters, we're working to refine the cost estimates and still awaiting a response from the finance director, who is checking with bond counsel as to whether or not we're able to use the bonding mechanism to fund that project.
So, any questions on those two items? We need a motion to ratify the TSA other transactional agreement for baggage belt reimbursement for $259,344.
I'll make
Make
that
that
motion.
motion?
Ms. Planzer, you want to make the motion?
Yes,
You may
I
the
wanna make
motion.
that motion.
Would you like to second it, Mr. Biscayne?
I'd be delighted.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Dan, if I may, just a note on that, that was about 23% of the total that was expended for that. and it was split that way across a number of airports because of the appropriation that was put forward or approved in Washington. We have a conference call this week to look at the next fiscal year and attempt to try to continue the funding until we all get 100% reimbursed. So.
The next item on the agenda is the hangar and tie-down rental policy, several sub-matters related to that. I would make the comment that this is not a public hearing per se, but we are going to invite comment from the public as well as from the commission on these matters. And we will schedule a public hearing for the next commission meeting. I believe it's October 9th.
And I'm going to recuse myself from this discussion.
Thank you.
Dana, if I may on this too, we recommended one change to the policy, and that was not to permit subleasing in the future. The other three agreements, two are leases, one is a license agreement, are draft right now, and we put in the only change to the proposed rates and charges would be establishing a rent for T-hanger, and that would be $450. After hearing feedback from various users, based on the fact that it's a limited fixed size, one price instead of a dual rate, it's easier accounting wise as well. And with the $450, we did our analysis, and it looks like there should be enough funding to be able to maintain that building as well, so there'll be no assessments.
So that's $50 more than what we have in our packet? Am I looking at that right?
Don't think so.
Okay, well, I've got hangar which is $400 and for one monthly and $300 for another monthly. And this,
Well, you might be looking at our common hangars, one with heat and one without.
okay, all
As
right.
opposed to the T-hanger.
All
Should be
right,
in
thank you,
bold, I
that's
think.
true, I am, sorry.
Is there comment at this time on these policies or on the leases or anything else? Mr. Drabkin? Would you please identify yourself at the microphone?
Thank you. My name, as many of you know, is Stephen Drabkin. I'm a retired federal official and full-time resident for many years of Nantucket. I'm also the founding board member of the Flying Association, a longtime supporter of the airport. I am currently subleasing a T-hanger and have been in 2 different T-hangers for over 11 years. I currently have an aircraft in the T-hanger with a partner of mine. It's critical I continue to have access to a hangar in order to keep an aircraft on Nantucket. I am suggesting that the lease the draft as it was written, either grandfather existing subleases and or offer the primary lease to the subleaser if the existing owner does not re-up.
Excuse me, Mr. Drabkin, can I ask you a question, please?
Absolutely.
Does the primary tenant from whom you sublet the hangar have an airplane that he keeps in the hangar too?
No. My aircraft's the only aircraft in the hangar.
Okay, thank you.
I believe there are a few others in the same position as mine. Not sure exactly, we'd have to get down the list, but I think there's probably a couple. Other than that, that's basically all I have to say. Appreciate your consideration. And if there's anything I can do or make myself available to help out with this, I'd be more than happy to. Thank you.
Sir. Other comments? Mr. Cheney?
Thank you, Stephen Cheney, 18-year resident and pilot. I presently own a hangar and own the rights to use the hangar, and the current plane that I have now doesn't fit in a T hangar any longer. But as I've said in the past, I think it's really important that we keep the pricing really affordable for those smaller hangars, which, as Tom already mentioned, really only fit a small general aviation aircraft. Reading through the proposed draft, I question where the accounting has determined how the accounting has determined the current rate. We had done some research as an association and determined that the taxes were about $4,000, the insurance was less than 10, so not including maintenance at $450 a month times 12 hangars, that's a net of about $55,000. That seems like an excessive amount of reserve to cover expenses that we're not aware of, but the maintenance of a hangar that's presently in very good condition and exclusive of the major maintenance item, which is the hangar door, which in the current draft it says would be the responsibility of the tenants. So I would love to get a better understanding, or at least have the commissioners have a better understanding of how that is determined to be, pro GA, keeping the costs low. The other thing I would like to just question is, unrelated to the T hangars, but also in this draft, in the common hangars, the rate proposed, or actually the existing rate, as I read it, is that for a single engine in the non-heated hangar, it's $300 a month, and for a turboprop, it jumps to $900 a month. I just think that should be given a closer look, because there's aircraft that are the exact same size, such as mine, that are turboprop, offered in a turboprop, and a piston aircraft. So it doesn't seem logical that the price should be triple for an aircraft that takes up the same amount of space. So perhaps one might look at the maximum gross takeoff weight to determine that fee, but just a side note.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Not for me.
Thank you. Mr. Planzer?
Good evening, I'm Neil Planzer, and I share a hangar with Gail Avery on the T hangar. So a couple points that I found of interest that I want to raise to the commission so you can think about. We currently pay $340 a month for the T hangar to a private enterprise that earns money off of it. In effect, you're raising the cost of the hangar by a third, from $340 to $450. In addition, in the shared hangar, which is valet parking, you pull up, you say, here's my airplane, here are the keys, and you leave it. You call a couple hours ahead of time and say, I need the airplane out, and they bring it out. In the T hangars, you don't do that. The T hangars are all physical, moving in and out. It is illogical in my looking at the pricing that I can get a $300 hangar that's unheated with valet parking, or $450 for a T hangar, and I got to do all the physical work. If I'm concerned about a heated hangar, I can get a heated hangar for $50 less by going to the shared hangar. In addition, there's a charge for our maintenance of the doors. That really is 90% of the maintenance of that hangar. The two big items would be the roof, which has been looked at, it's fine, and the hangars. The hangars are individual.
You mean the doors?
So,
you mean the doors?
Yes, thank you, Dan. So the doors, and over the last few years, my partner and I have spent about $1,400 on maintaining the door. And that's a big expense. So if you're going to charge the $450 and then charge me for the hangars, in effect, I'm paying $500 or $550, which is out of line compared to the shared hangars. Someone said that there's a concern about hangar rash in the shared hangars. There really isn't. If you ding a wing putting it in and out, that's not the owner's prerogative. All the airplanes, by the way, by law, are insured anyway. And so the hangar rash doesn't really affect the use of those hangars. In those $8, $9 million airplanes, they probably have a concern because their deductible is so high. But for us, it's absolutely minor. So the point I'm trying to make is that we should not be looking at raising the rates of that hangar by a minimum of a third. It's illogical to the people in the hangars. If that were any other type of residence or any other storage of something, you'd be pretty upset by that price range increase of a third. I think that we'd like, Tom, if you could look at this again. I also checked around some hangars in the Washington, D.C. area where we previously had the airplane, and they have waiting lists of 150 people, and the hangars are less than $400. The waiting list is not a business where the waiting list drives up the price. You're not auctioning off the hangar. Normally, the way the airports do it is you've got a waiting list. Neil leaves. Steve puts his airplane in there. He's the next on the list. That doesn't drive the price. When I looked at your list, and when we first got here, we got on that list, and we got a hangar very quickly. The reality of it is that hangar is going to cover, when you get the list looked at, there's maybe 5 or 6 airplanes on that list that fit in that hangar. Right now, I count 6 empty hangars, or hangars that will be empty, such as Steve's. When he loses ownership of that hangar, his new airplane doesn't fit in it, it's going to be an empty hangar. So you have enough to fill your list, and I think you'll still have empty hangars. So I'm not quite sure I understand where the price came from. That's it.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment? Commissioners have any questions for Mr. Rafter?
I had a couple of thoughts. I think the initial input on the pricing is good, but I also think that it's really for the next meeting when it's an actual public hearing. This was included here, but the actual hearing to focus on the rates and charges would be a public hearing, advertised that way. But I think this is very valuable as a precursor, and perhaps it's worth just repeating, or there'll be an adjustment made for what's published then, and or more backup information from the administration. My focus, and per the agenda items for tonight, was the language of the leases and the policies. And that's what I was hoping we could spend a few minutes on, a couple of questions, and then maybe a discussion to be sure that that's what we're trying to hammer out first, because there is a change. There are several changes as I read these documents in terms of how things have been done. And I think the input back and a discussion of whether that's going to work, or there's potentially, any flaws, much like the sublease issue, is worthy of discussion tonight.
Just one note in that regard too, and to some of the comments. We have limited information in terms of what is for certain. We don't have copies of leases or anything. We're going based off of information that had been supplied previously by the existing tenant. So I'd ask if anybody knows of anyone too, please make sure we have their information. Because everything you're telling us, some of this is new in terms of who's in a hangar and who's not in a hangar. We have information, but we don't know how accurate it is, because the prior tenant was not required to supply any of that. They have in the past, and they've done it to the best of our knowledge. It's accurate, but we don't know. So I'm glad to take any comments on the
Well,
leases.
yeah, let me see if
Yeah.
if you have anything else.
Well, I could dig into the couple of things that I was thinking
Well,
about,
why don't
but
we wait for a minute for that? Mrs. Topham? do you
I'm all
have-
set, thank you.
Ms. Karen, do you have? Yeah, I have a couple of points I would hope that could be addressed too. Maybe specific points relating to the lease, and one relates to people who lease the hangars but don't use them. And I think we are led to believe that while they may not have planes in them, the T hangars are fully rented.
No, to the best of my knowledge, we have a few that we know don't have airplanes in them.
Right.
but they're probably rented.
Right.
They may be under an agreement or something, but there's no aircraft.
Right. And may I just finish and then ask for comments? The other, I mean, I take, I think it was Mr. Cheney's point about the fact that there may not, in effect, be a waiting list. I've been led to believe there's a waiting list. And, you know, one of the things that we've talked, Mr. Rafter and I have talked about, and I think the rest of the commission should address as well, is the issue of, should somebody be able to rent a hangar and not keep a plane in it? Why shouldn't the relationship be directly with the person who is keeping a plane in it? And even to take it a step further, should preference be given to Nantucket residents? So I throw those issues out too, if anybody wants to comment on them. But I think, do you have some more specific things that you'd like comments on?
Well, I think that much like I know, in my mind as I was reading this, I compare it as a boat owner, not a plane owner, to be on the mooring list. I need to have a registered boat, and to get a mooring sticker, I need a registered boat. So I don't understand how you can get a hangar without a registered plane. And that is one of the things that I want, you know, in the interest of promoting general aviation, that's one of the changes that I was happy to see, you know, and discuss that. And part of why I thought that it was proper to go the route where the airport controlled this, because then you actually have the power of enforcement if somebody is using a hangar without an airplane or for some other purpose. So that's one of the things I supported. And then, yeah, I also agree that much like the steamship, you know, if there was a way to determine, you know, resident status in terms of how maybe preference, certainly I think there should always be a right of first refusal to a current tenant. But then if you start looking through as things become available, if there's two folks waiting and one is a year-round Nantucket resident, in the interest of promoting general aviation using Nantucket as your home base, that I'd like to see a way to have that be a criteria for evaluation. What was it?
Any of you have any thoughts on those topics, Mr. Planter?
I thought that, by the way, was really interesting input. I commend you for the way you're thinking of it. A couple of things I want to make aware. They really don't lease the hangar structures now. They own the hangar structures now. That ends in December, and the entire...
Who owns them?
The individual hangar tenants own that structure. The airport owns the land.
Is this... what leads you to say that?
It's a fact. They buy that. They bought those hangars 30 years ago on a 20-year lease. The airport extended it for 10 more, so that they actually own it. At the end of the 30 years, that lease reverts the structure. You always own the land. Reverts the structure to the airport. Now, so by the way, you have to understand that I am absolutely in favor of the airport taking over those hangars, and I think I've spoken to several of you about that. I think that's great. So we're not in any way complaining about that. The reason some of the hangars are empty is they were hoping, the individual owners, that in the new structure they would be given the same leasing of the land and ownership of the hangars so they could sell them. And those hangars have been sold by those individuals over the course of those 30 years multiple times. And they make the earnings from that go to the individuals. The airport got none of that. So what's happening is, in anticipation of the possibility that they would be able to sell those hangars after the initiation of the new lease, they held on to them. That's why they're empty. Not in all cases, but at least 3 of the cases. They're just waiting for the opportunity to sell that. Again, when that dissipated, you'll find it next year, starting in 19, when the airport owns it, they're not going to rent empty hangars. They're not going to say, well, I want it because I like the airspace in the hangar. As far as the hangars themselves, and you have to understand that for me, I've spent 25 years in the Federal Aviation Administration. I'm very familiar with how this works. In the absence of your former FAA attorney, let me add a few things. You always have control. Those hangars must be used for aeronautical use. They must be used for aeronautical use. There is a new change to the FAA regulations that says if all the hangars are not needed and there is no airplane demand, you can ask the FAA if you can use it for other storage purposes, but they must approve it. You will not get that approved on a 121 operating airport. That's really designed for those small airports that don't operate air carriers. So that's not going anywhere. But you've always had that authority. You don't want those hangars to be used as storage units. I think the way you lease is, and I thought it was fine, you're allowed to keep a car in there when you take the airplane out, so you don't have to park it in the corral. It's logical. I got that. That makes sense. You don't want them to be storage units. It's the bane of the airport if you've got to manage that. So I think the airport controlled is good. Aeronautical use is absolutely critical, Art. It's got to be aeronautical use. And I think that we are right now in a position where you're going to have hangars that become vacant, and you can go and see what on your list is going to happen to fill, you have that list. You've got, I don't know, what was it, Steve, 4 172s and a couple of Cirruses. I think you're going to be able to accommodate those. Those types of airplanes fit in there. There's a couple on, someone's got a Phenom jet. It's got to go in the big hangar. It's not going in those small hangars. So to reiterate, Art, I agreed with what you said. This is not a public hearing. But what I thought would be good, and my colleagues here thought, is if we gave you these issues now, it reduces any angst at the public hearing.
Without a doubt.
But for myself personally, I've always wanted the airport to take them over. I thought it was pretty haphazard. The ownership of the hangar is your old issue, not today's issue. They're in good shape, but I thought if that helped clarify it, then that was my purpose.
Thank you. One further question, if I may. Do the tenants pay, in addition to the rent and the cost of maintaining the door, do they pay any other maintenance charges?
Yeah, they pay all maintenance. It's the hangar.
In addition to the rent?
Yes.
So it's a sort of a net lease, in a way, under the current arrangement?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. 340 maintenance, 450 maintenance. That's not net. That's a
No,
30.
I'm talking about the present.
Yeah.
Present arrangement.
We pay,
Because this 450 includes the maintenance.
no, minus the door is the
minus the
maintenance.
door, yeah.
The only maintenance that I've
Well, that's what I was asking.
Yeah, the door is the only maintenance I've had over the last
But
7
I mean,
years.
has there been general maintenance of the facility that has been charged back to the tenants?
Yeah, there has been, but not. It's been like $400 for like a couple of years ago. But they can do that. The two big things you have to be concerned about. Now, this is a repetition by intent, not senility. Is you have to worry about the doors, and those are individuals. Steve's door could be fine, and mine can break. Gail Aver and I are partners, and I'm lucky because Gail is about as mechanical as you can get, and he fixes it himself. Because otherwise it costs you a couple $1,000s to get them fixed. The other maintenance piece is the roof. That's the other big maintenance piece, and that's common. It's like a condominium, so they're not going to replace it over your hangar. They're going to replace it over the whole thing. Those are fine. We looked at those. Steve, when his group was getting together, they had them checked. There's not a problem. You should understand that you can have a reserve for that, but we just think that the amount of the rent plus maintenance is higher than it should be. And I'm going by what I know on this airport and on other airports. understanding I've had an airplane, Andrea and I have owned an airplane for 40 years. Not the same one, but we've owned multiple airplanes for 40 years, so we understand how that operates. The other thing you said, which I thought was, Dan, you said, which is fascinating, and I like it, I'm agreeing with you. Whether you can do it or not is up to you guys. If you have a year-round resident, so Steve Cheney is a commercial business, he wants to keep his hangar there, he's going to use that airplane from this hangar 12 months a year, he's going to buy fuel, he's going to visit the airport, he's going to do all the things you want him to do. If you give it to Neil, who lives in Charlotte, and comes up here for 10 weeks, that hangar becomes vacant for the remaining period of time. And it's, so if you had the demand, I would say, of course I am a resident, so of course I like it. But I think from a business standpoint, I'd rather hang it occupied than vacant. Because when you have it occupied, people go and check it.
Yeah, it's not just from my perspective, it's not just a business reason, such as you mentioned, but it's also, again, the idea of encouraging general aviation here. I mean, if somebody comes and says, I wanted to buy a plane, and there's no hangar for it,
right?
And he doesn't want to have it on a tie down or whatever, he wants it in a covered place. And we can accommodate him give him priority because he's a resident.
Yeah, and I guess there are two other points I want to support my friend Steve. You have a lost set of people in the sublease. You know, Steve's been subleasing for 11 years, but because they've been owned by a third party, he doesn't exist in the record. So I think you've got to look at that and get him some position on the priority list, because otherwise you've got a long time local.
I think, if I might just interrupt, I don't think we need to belabor the point. I think our feeling is, and this will come out next time, that people who are actually using the hangars are the ones who should have the right of first refusal.
Right.
When the airport starts doling out the leases.
I agree with that, and I think that's good. I think this is a real healthy thing for the airport and will encourage the general aviation. So again, accommodation, I know Tom's been spearheading this, and I appreciate it, Tom. But we just have to do it smart and get it right the first time. And I think we can. Thank you.
Any further, anybody else in the audience want to comment? Anything else from the commissioners?
No, I would just like to comment that I'd like to give my sympathy to the gentleman because Dr. Stewart isn't here. Sherman, I mean, sorry.
Yes.
And since his last meeting. So I know that's a loss to all of you and to the community.
The airport is working on a financial analysis, so when this all comes out, you will see where we're coming from. It's not ready to be made public yet, but it is in the works, and we will have that for you. I think we have to figure out how we're going to make, because we have to agree on it as a commission first, so how we're going to do that in juxtaposition to the next meeting, we'll have to figure out, but it will be part of the discussion.
So is there a timeline now? You said it would be open for public comment at the next meeting, and then the following meeting would be to vote, is that correct?
Well, it can be done either way. It can be done, the comment next week and the voting the following time, the same time, or
I just wanted to comment on that we're required, I think, to have it out for at least 2 weeks prior to the hearing. And it's, I guess, the chairman or commission's prerogative whether or not you can continue the hearing. It can be done next month and continue. We could have input next month and then continue it the following. So.
As part of that, could we also revisit or perhaps have some explanation on the question between the single engine and the single turbo prop?
Well, I honestly, we can, if we're going to open up all the rates and charges, we're going to put this hearing back till June.
What if it's
because I think Mr. Cheney brought up a very good point too about, same size airplane, turbo, non-turbo. We should look at that. And so I don't disagree. I think maybe what we should do, and again, this is, you direct me, I work for you, address the T hangar, and then go back and revise or review all hangar rates for a June or whatever hearing. We'll look at it, but I can tell you it's not like you just look at that one issue and it doesn't affect the others, because it's gonna have an impact on all of them. So once I start looking at single and twin, then I gotta go back to the turbo versus the, the weight-based classification too.
I could
I'm not saying it's right, I'm just telling you.
I could see not looking at all of the rates and charges, which, airport wide, but we've got it down to one page.
We
It
will
just seems
look
to me
at-
if we're
we'll see if we
advertising,
can come up with something to address as many of the concerns as possible.
and maybe nothing changes. I just think it's a valid point if it's based on size, really.
Well,
I
again,
have
it's,
to-
not- it's,
I have to just say this because, and I understand where you're coming from in terms of what you're looking for, in terms of paying rent. When I got here, this airport was in $2 million in deficit a year. We're not making any money off of this, per se. We're actually, between the landing fees, the parking, and everything else that we're not, charging for.
collecting.
Essentially, there's nothing going back in for infrastructure, to pay the electric bill for the lights at night, to fix the pothole on the taxiway, to do any of that. There's nothing, none of that's considered in any of this analysis. So please just keep that in mind. I mean, you do get the benefit of a full-size airport. And I'm just putting it out there, when I look at all rates and charges, I gotta look at everything. So please keep that in mind when we start doing these analysis. If we start to look into a detailed rates and charges for all of these different cost centers, I can tell you, it's not gonna shake out pretty. The numbers are gonna be much higher to recover the costs. So we can look at it, we can come up with recommendations, but they're not going to be cost recovery mechanisms. They're gonna be, the airport's eating it. And that's what we're gonna end up having to do. So we'll look at it in terms of a fairness issue and balancing of things. But we're not making, like I say, it's not like the rentals of tie downs and T hangars and hangars are contributing anything to the infrastructure of the airport per se. Sorry, I just had to say my piece on that.
No.
Anything else on this topic? We look forward to seeing you again next month. Thank you,
Thank
all
you.
of you, for
Yeah,
your
thank you.
interest and participation.
And please, if there's anyone else that you know that is subleasing, please have them contact us or get us their information if you could. Because like I said, we have limited information. We know what we're told, but we don't know for a fact.
All right, thank you all. The grant signing letter of authorization, which is the, sorry, wait till Mr. Planzer gets back. You have in front of you the standard letter, which we sign every year, authorizing me to sign on behalf of the airport for federal and state contracts, grants, and other agreements totaling $50,000 or more pertaining to projects previously approved by the entire commission. And believe me, you don't want to sign these things because there are copies upon copies upon copies. My autograph value will never have any substance.
Do you need a motion for
Please.
that? I'll make that motion to approve you signing the hundreds of millions of dollars away.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
I suppose I should abstain. No, I'll vote aye. All right, manager's report.
Under the projects, we're going to circle back with the consultant on the ALP update and geometry issue. The latest alternative is a proposal to run a semi-parallel run or taxiway to runway 624, which would be, in my personal opinion and talking to some engineers, very costly and also eat up a lot of our environmental credits. And the numbers we ran, the utilization as a landing strip it's less than 2% of our entire operations. So we're going to have the consultant take another look at that. On the app ride / TNC Uber Lyft group, we had a phone conversation with representatives from Uber who requested that the app ride designated areas be moved closer to the terminal in the off-peak season. We said we would, think about that. We've considered it, but given the fact that we have operators that are paying us a fee, I think in all fairness that they should not obtain parity until they're paid a fee. So we're going to keep the Uber in the designated area where they are currently. The Hangar 5 construction is complete. It's a job very well done. We're just waiting for a survey on that, and they may also be coming back for some additional improvements. Blades improvements are complete. They held an event last week, and we're setting up a meeting with them to discuss some minor outstanding items that they have to just close some loops on. On the RFP and bid update, Sun Island Road, we received one proposal for half an acre, and that's going to be reviewed. We had the committee approved by the procurement officer, and we're going to be performing a review and may have to interview the one proposal. The fuel supply RFP, we're continuing development of that. Bids for the building overhead doors are out a second time. We didn't receive any the first time, and they're due in on September 20th. And we'll be issuing an RFP shortly for the UPS site and working with Marine Home on their extension request. On the operations side of the house, Labor Day financial results, total gallons sold were up 6%. Fuel sales were up 18%, and total sales were up 10%. Under freight, Allies facility is up and operational, and we had previously determined when we modified our minimum standards that once that facility is available, we'll no longer permit freight to be processed through the terminal. We sent letters out to both Retrix and Cape Air. Cape Air has indicated that they want to continue handling freight through the terminal, and we'll be reviewing our grant assurances as they relate to that matter. Cape Air also announced new air service, one daily flight from Nantucket to Kennedy through the winter, beginning October 23rd, continuing through mid-May. Flights will depart Nantucket at 9:44, arrive Kennedy at 11:05, and then leaving Kennedy at noon and returning back to Nantucket at 1:42. We had on the agenda last week a review of a helicopter incident. We've received some response to our investigation. The pilot called today and stated he would not be able to make it because of the weather. But he is asking that he be reinstated and permitted to operate, and we put everything on hold. Again, I support our findings. I actually saw this operation. If the individual wants to come in and plead his case, that's fine.
Well, excuse me, Mr. Rafter. My understanding is he was told that when it happened, he was told he was banned from the airport for safety reasons.
Yes.
And that he was also told that if he wanted to discuss it with the commission, he could come and meet with the commission. Mm-hmm. And for at least 2 months now, we've heard from him that he can't make it because of the weather. And now he's saying he doesn't understand why he has to come. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
And what I would like to do is advise him that we will take up the matter as soon as he shows up at a regularly scheduled commission meeting where it's on the agenda and will be carried forward on the agenda. But that there are, from my perspective, and I hope from the rest of the commission's perspective, there are too many discrepancies between his story and I shouldn't say the facts, but the transcripts and the photographs and the eyewitnesses,
including
what happened.
In his room.
And that in order to get this resolved, we have to have him present.
Okay, I will relay
Is
that
that
to him.
agreeable? Is that?
Yeah, I have two questions. Is this transcript that we got or the recording, is that an FAA or is that our
The
own
recording from
in the
the
last
pilot?
from the
Yeah,
tower?
from the whole thing.
Well-
Roger Road and all of that wonderful stuff.
Okay.
Romeo Whiskey.
And I'll ask Noah to clarify that, because I believe we had some recordings. He had obtained some recordings from the tower under a FOIA agreement.
Because that's something
You
I'd
wanna
like to know
address
if
that,
they
Noah?
are the same or is there some discrepancy? And it also said that we could get an audio of that recording from you or from the FAA or from both.
Sure. Noah Carberg, Assistant Airport Manager. The audio file that I provided is the same audio file that the pilot FOIA'd from the FAA. The transcript is a verbatim transcript that I produced from that file. The audio file can also be made available and played for you. I can put it on a USB or might be too big to email, but I can file transfer it to you for your review.
So the transcript was from the FAA.
Correct, and I'll reiterate, it's my verbatim transcripts. It's possible that I could have missed something, but you're welcome to review.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? I'm going to ask for a motion on what I just said, that we require his presence at a meeting to discuss this and will not take action on it until he appears
I agree.
at a scheduled meeting.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
There discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Did you vote aye, Mr.
I did.
Sparrow? Thank you. It's unanimous. Airport management, please advise him
Will
of
do.
that.
Yep. Continuing on Saturday, August 18th, we had an operations employee that was towing an aircraft, apparently struck another plane. The accident has been investigated and we're taking the appropriate actions against the staff members involved. And on August 25th, we had a Cirrus aircraft taxiing on the grass that struck another Cirrus aircraft. And we're looking into that one as well. Any questions before we go on to statistics?
Would you explain that a little bit more, please, what had happened?
Which one?
The last two, personnel.
The first one, we had one of our employees that was towing a Hawker jet to reposition it. Came in contact with an E-145 Embraer jet, and minor damage, but still they hit each other. And there were issues with regard to the reporting and timing of the reports and types of reports that were filed.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
we're following up with that. We take that very seriously. That's anytime an
Definitely.
aircraft gets touched, there's a lot of things that need to be done. The other was the two Cirrus. Apparently one was parked a little off the line and the other one was trying to jockey around and struck, again, minor damage, but struck the other airplane. And
Was
this-
that anything to do with our personnel
No,
or
it was
just?
a pilot that was taxiing the
themselves?
airplane on the grass.
Okay, thank you.
Question, do we use a wing walker if you're in the
That's-
proximity of a commercial airplane like that?
We are supposed to, yes, and I don't want to comment too much because it's still, we have a hearing tomorrow on
Okay.
this. Anything else?
No, thank you.
Statistics, the operations were down 19.5%. General aviation operations were down 5.2 for July. The enplanements are up 6.75 over last July, and as I mentioned last time, it appears that the enplanements are starting to show a little bit of recovery, and certainly on the seasonal basis, and may make up for some of the loss on the off-season. Cape Air saw an increase of 8% in enplanements, United a 38% with less flights. Delta experienced an 18% decrease associated with number of flights. JetBlue experienced a 3% increase, while Nantucket Air had a 30% decrease. Tradewind was down 1%, and Retrix was up 32% over last July. Also, American saw a 21% increase, even with the fewer flights. So,
Why
very-
does American or the others not want to do year-round, or are they asked to do it, or is
and
it just?
let me, if I may back up, I apologize. I forgot to mention We had a end of season meeting with American and with United. We're going to be meeting with the other two. Both extremely happy with the season. It's not that they don't want to, there's just not enough lift. They don't believe there's enough of a market, especially for their size airplanes.
Okay.
But they're very, very happy with the market. In fact, American made a comment that they want to treat this as a year-round market and have all the facilities and everything else. So maybe if there's, hopefully we could build into something like that. In the Boston market, Cape Air experienced a 3% increase, while JetBlue saw a 6% increase. DCA, JetBlue was up 2%, and American had an 18% increase, with an 81% load factor. New Bedford traffic continues to increase. It was up 15%, with 125 passengers. United to Newark had a 38% increase. Cape Air's White Plain traffic was up 6% over last July. And in the Hyannis market, it was up 3% for the total market, or 137 passengers, with Cape Air up 217 passengers, Nantucket Air decreasing by 338, and Retrix increasing by 258 passengers. So I think that's very telling, the Hyannis market in the season. It'll be interesting to see what August brings. JetBlue in the JFK market had a 3% increase, or 218 passengers. American traffic to LaGuardia was up 2%, while Delta was up 321%, or 1,094 passengers. And Retrix, we don't have the details on the Retrix, but we do know that in July, the enplanements were 29 passengers to LaGuardia on Retrix. American's new service to Charlotte has been very successful, with a 93% load factor carrying 218 passengers. Vineyard traffic was down 46%, or 93 passengers. On the fuel side of the house, the Jet A gallon sold in July was down 6.5 and up 19.5 for August. So August was a very busy month. Avgas for July was up 9.66, and for August up 12.6%. Freight for July was up 4.9 over last July, but you can see there's some drops there too. I believe it was UPS saw a drop. Yes, UPS saw a significant drop there, but overall was up. Noise complaints are up this year from 25 in July of last year to 59 this year. There's a detailed report included in your packet. 54% of the complaints came from a single resident, so we have to take all that in consideration.
All the same complaints about the same issues or not?
I think it's a mixed bag of different issues.
And where is this particular area that he's complaining, he or she is complaining about?
Oh, Madigan.
Okay. Must have been on the beach.
Have
Thank
the
you.
complaints from that individual abated any?
On the personnel side of the house, we're working with Marcia Egan to provide some leadership and management training. And I have one request for the commission for travel.
I think we should scrutinize this.
Well, you're welcome to. If I elect to go to the Aviation Issues Conference in Hawaii in January, I'd like to ask the commission to allow me to not have to use vacation time and possibly pay for my flight to and from Boston, but I'll pay for everything else.
So you're only asking us to pay for Nantucket to Boston and you're do the rest?
Yes,
Okay, because that was one of my questions. How much was this going to cost?
whatever the Cape
Probably
Air
about
ticket is.
$700.
Well, no, not that, but the Hawaii.
cheaper.
Might be better for us to pay to Hawaii than to
Okay,
pay to
that was the part I was concerned about. Okay, thank you.
Is there a motion to approve Mr. Rafter's travel request that use of vacation for the trip to the AAE Aviation Issues Conference in Hawaii be January 6th to 10th, 2019 be waived, and that the airport reimburse him for any air travel expense from between Nantucket and Boston?
I'll make that motion.
there a second?
I'll second.
Is there further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Opposed? No. Okay. Commissioners' comments.
I've made mine.
I attended the Massachusetts Airport Managers Association Annual Conference in Vineyard Haven. And I'll tell you, getting from here to the Vineyard and back is one of the more difficult things that one can do, particularly after September 3rd. The flights are very hard to find, if any. And I came back yesterday. I was actually going to take the ferry to Hyannis and the ferry from Hyannis over, but the ferries were canceled because of high winds in Oak Bluffs. And I ended up flying over on Cape Air and to Hyannis for a very low fare, one we never see on Nantucket, and on a special fare on Retrix from Hyannis.
Late
here.
afternoon?
It was, I think they do it on Mondays. It's
Yeah.
an Islander fare.
Yeah.
Anyway, the conference was very interesting. I have pages and pages of notes, which I will not bore you with, but I'd be happy to talk to anybody who wants to know. Just very quickly, the first part of the meeting on Sunday, this was a roundtable for commissioners, was on the difference between the commissioner's role and the commission's role and the commissioner's role and the airport manager's role, and who was specifically responsible for what. And basically it comes down to overall fiscal responsibility and policy setting on the part of the commission, with other, various aspects of airport operations involved in that. For the airport manager, it's everything else. Jack of all trades was the first words that went up on the whiteboard about an airport manager. But it was good. And the only thing that was brought out of that, and I think it goes both ways between the commission and the airport manager, is that there should be no surprises. There was a lot of discussion about grant assurances, and most of it we've already run into.
Dan, if I may, on grant assurances, just so the commission's aware, at our staff meeting, we had some standing items, and what I had done for quite a while is I went through a different grant assurance each meeting and briefed the entire staff, or the senior staff, on what is meant by them and what's required.
But the thing that is emphasized in these discussions is the permanent grant assurances that don't go away ever, being restrictions on the use of revenue, or put another way, potential revenue diversion, and the financial sustainability of the airport, self-sustainability of the airport.
How many other areas were there?
Well, if you look at the list, let me just mention a
Just-
couple of things, but if you look at the list, they were mostly consultants,
Okay.
unfortunately. The Martha's Vineyard Airport Commission was represented by its manager and by all 7 commissioners.
That was easy.
They're quite a crew. But other than that, it was a pretty sparse turnout among the airports, the 39 airports that are part of MAMA. And the consultants and attorneys and so forth outweighed the airport people probably 2 to 1, or maybe even more. But I think it was worth going to once. That's what I say. I'm not sure I'd go again, but it was worth going to once. That's all I have. Anybody else have anything under commissioners' comments? Is there public comment at this time? I'm sorry, did you have something?
Yeah, I just had one thought, which was, and I know it goes back to the hangar policy, so I apologize for sort of going back to another topic, but perhaps we could seek input from council before the next meeting with respect to how we might structure preferential listing or for residents.
Street, yes.
Well, also for existing actual users as opposed to.
Right, and maybe that was given, you were gonna do that, but my,
That's a different,
I think we
they're
could have some
related.
language for
Yeah.
that.
and I think that it would be good to have Dave weigh in on, you know, what we can,
Yeah,
how far we might be able to take it.
We have one of his attorneys looking at that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Would you have to come up to the microphone, Mr. Marks, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Phil Marks. Just one thing, comment you made earlier about not getting on the list unless you have a registered airplane to you. The only thing that I just was, maybe if there could be, you could get on the list, but you had to put an airplane in the hangar within a certain amount of time. Because often, like, if you're going to spend a whole bunch of money on an airplane, you don't want to have to tie it outside in the grass.
Yeah.
So that's just the only thing. I think that
We had contemplated, I believe, 90 days.
Thank you, Bill.
Public comment, Mr. Barrett?
David Barrett, ACK Taxi. Just a question on procedure. In the past 3 months, June, July, and August, 6, 7, maybe 8 written complaints were submitted to Miss True. She made it clear to us that, you know, not to come in and make a verbal complaint, that if it would be taken serious if we brought it in writing. And I know there was 6 or 7, maybe 8 that have been submitted, some with pictures, and that was the end of it. We were curious as to what was, when the people we complained about and the issues were looked at, and they supposedly were going to go to the owners of the taxis and resolve them. And
What kind of issues were these? I mean, it's a different question, but
Yeah,
what kind of issues? Just give me an example, one example.
taxis sneaking out of the line and going into operations without being called. And that's basically taking money away from the people that were in front of them. And they just go in, they see somebody coming across the tarmac, they just pull out and back in like they're there. And then when they go to
Okay, I got it. I
Yeah.
got it. Understand.
that, and
No, that's a good example.
there's some sneaky, really sleazy operations. And they're still at it. So I'm wondering if
If I
anything-
may, I apologize we didn't get back to you, but there were actions taken. And again, we investigate these things, we go to the facts, and we have documentation of how there's a prearranged service for one of them. So what you may observe as one thing is factually something else. And by law, we cannot not allow them to have a prearranged, they can pick up prearranged passengers, get out of the line and get prearrangements. We can't stop that.
Yeah, but if you read the complaint, they would go in and back in, like, and they would just sit and turn their head and nod to, and one guy said, I was standing right there.
Well, I mean, again, it can look like one thing and be something else.
Yeah, well, the guy replied, he said, I'm not waiting for a taxi, I have a ride. And with that, he took off and left. It was obvious. I mean,
Okay,
we
all right,
would just
well,
like to know
all right, all
a
right.
comeback on an answer to what
I
we
don't
take the
think
time
we'll-
to
We'll
complain
get
about.
back to you.
Can we do anything about them not having their tag on the front and the back of their cars? Aren't they supposed to have an
The-
Uber?
No, we're not
Oh,
talking
not
about
Uber.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is all taxi stuff.
Taxi, I'm sorry. Through my fault.
That's okay.
I'm back.
We'd just like to have some comeback to know that it was looked at and the owners were contacted about the driver's
We'll get a
behavior.
response.
Yeah, thank you.
My question still is what I'd like to know. Can we do anything about the
We
Uber
have
tags?
brought it to the attention of law enforcement,
Um,
and that's a continuing issue, is trying to have the law enforcement actually enforce that.
Because I hear that all around town, not just for the airport, but they don't have their tag on and all of that. And it's just, I guess anybody and everybody is doing Uber.
All we can do is bring it to the attention when we try to observe what we think is an Uber and ask the law enforcement to check it out.
Thank you.
All right, I will entertain a motion to go into an executive session without returning to public session.
I'll make that
To review
one.
executive session minutes as enumerated on the agenda, to consider the lease value of various leases. The chair has determined that an open session may have a detrimental effect on the negotiation position of the airport commission, And Clause 3, to discuss strategy with respect to pending litigation in respect to airport improvement plan, AIP projects. The chair has determined that an open session may have a detrimental effect on the litigation position of the airport. Is there such a motion?
I'll make
So
a
moved.
motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
How do you vote, Mr. Biscarian?
Aye.
How do you vote, Mrs.
Aye.
Conlon? Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. The answer to your question is, my wife has a friend who's an Uber driver. She says they don't do it because they're scared to death of the taxis, vandalism, and that kind of thing.
Because I know somebody called an Uber I was with the other night, and I said, I can't drive you home because I only, my eyes now, I'm just driving less. And the person came, no Uber thing, and